Okay, thank you for joining us. As you see right here, we have this man up on the screen. This, of course, is 1994, when the New Frontier Party, which is called Shinshinto in Japanese, was formed. And, you know, I've already seen, I haven't been covering politics in Tokyo for very long, but I've already seen many, many new political parties be formed. And, however, when I look at the video of the New Frontier Party being formed, it's very different from the political parties being formed today. Because nowadays it's usually some little white-walled room in the basement of the Giin Kaikan, but this one was a huge production. I mean, it was in some giant auditorium with speakers and poetry and dancing and singing students. I want to kind of move forward to the end of this and just take a look at how huge a production this was, because clearly this party was meant at that time to be a ruling party of Japan for a long time. So let's go ahead and take a look at the end of the process here. Who's that guy? They don't launch political parties like this anymore. Okay. Well, for those of you who don't know me, my name is Michael Penn. I'm the secretary of the club on the board of directors. And I'll be your moderator tonight and host of the Political Roundtable series, which in principle will be about once a month. And our two guests are next to me. This man here is Mr. Harunobu Yonenaga sensei. He was, first of all, a colleague of ours as a journalist. He was a Fuji television journalist for many years. I know, for example, he told me he covered the tsunami in Aceh. And he had a lot of international postings. Then in 2007, he ran for the House of Councillors and was elected from Yamanashi Prefecture. He was a district lawmaker, not a party list lawmaker. And he served in the House of Councillors for 6 years, one term. And in last summer, he lost his race, and now he's fortunately available to come and talk to us and to give us a lot of insight on the political world. Originally, he was a DPJ lawmaker when he was elected, and then he joined Minamoto, right? Your party.
After 6 months of freelance.
Right. So there were many people who came in with the great DPJ wave who later became sort of disenchanted with how the party's policies seemed to change once it came into government. And he was one of those. And he felt that on principle he had to leave. On the further side there is Mr. Chris Winkler. Many of you, I think, know him. He's at the, what is it, German Institute for Japanese Studies, yes. I was guilty of saying that he was from the German Institute of Japanese Studies, but I was corrected. But by all accounts, one of the most knowledgeable scholars in Japan right now working on Japanese politics. And this is kind of the format which I would like to see in the political roundtables, which is one person who is essentially a practitioner of Japanese politics, and another person is an analyst. So get somewhat different perspectives, and each month a little bit different theme. This is the second of the roundtables, and it's similar in theme to the first one, because we're looking mainly at the opposition parties. But of course, if you're going to look at the opposition parties, you can't also neglect looking at the ruling party. A couple of housekeeping notes, I guess we can call them. The roundtables are different from almost every other press conference event which you'll come to at the FCCJ, mainly because the people who make this event happen are not simply the people up here at the head table, but you. It isn't you ask a question and then you go sit down and be quiet. We want your opinion. And particularly, we do want your opinions because I can see around this table a lot of people of great knowledge and insight themselves. So we want this to be a back and forth and a discussion. So that means that your opinion, and not simply your questions, are things that we want to hear. So, so realize that roundtable discussion means that it goes both ways. And I should also say that around 7 o'clock or so, we'll have a 10-minute break. And during that 10-minute break, it's a networking time. So time for you to go and pass Meishis to the other people in the room and basically to talk to people more informally in the middle of the event. All right, well, with no further ado, let's go ahead and get into the meat of the subject. And we start with Shinshinto, the New Frontier Party. Why did that party come together? Well, of course, in 1994, the opposition parties were split into many, many small little parties. And they felt that in order to have any chance to challenge the giant liberal democratic party, they needed to bring together people. It just so happened that a lot of those groups and parties they brought together had very different policy ideas, but they did come together under the New Frontier Party. But the experience wasn't so successful. The New Frontier Party fought in one House of Representatives election and one House of Councillors election. And in the House of Representatives election, they did have one success. They had more proportional representative seats than the LDP did in their first election. But of course, they were killed in the single-member districts, which the LDP has always had a very, very strong advantage in. But in the second election, they lost all around. The LDP beat them in every respect. And shortly after that, the party dissolved in acrimony and different groups pointing fingers at others saying, we don't agree with you and that. Well, here we are in 2014. We just saw the Nihon Ishin no Kai, the Japan Restoration Party, has just split into two. And with the prospect that perhaps the Hashimoto or Osaka wing of the Japan Restoration Party and the Unity Party, Yui no To, and maybe part of the DPJ are thinking of coming together to build a new party of some kind, perhaps similar to what Shinshinto did. Will it be better this time? Can it work this time? Can groups that have different policy ideas really make a party that's coherent enough to challenge the LDP? That's the question we start with. And that's the first question I pose to Yonenaga sensei.
Yes, good evening. My name is Yonenaga. As Michael introduced myself, I used to be a TV journalist for 17 years in Fuji Television. I covered Germany, Berlin correspondent for 5 years, and I covered tsunami and Iraq, Afghanistan, field work like that. So, and to answer your question, will it work this time, or how different it is? I'm also a member of your party still, so a comment this evening comes solely from my personal point of view, not as a party member. But I would exclude what happened before and now is completely different, and it will not work this time. That's my conclusion at this point. At this point. And the reason, there are a lot of reasons, but the most, the biggest reason is the electoral system. What happened 20 years ago? That was the first election when we shifted from middle-sized electoral district with multiple seats into small district with a single membership seat. And the opposition party was very ready for the new constituency. They chose one of the member in each constituency. Some constituency was fought among both Liberal Democratic Party members. For example, Gunma Gok. I remember the former prime ministers, Mr. Obuchi and Fukuda, fought in that electoral district. Now, in the coming election, or the last election, there was one member from Liberal Democrat and multiple electoral person from each small members of the opposition party, and that's not going to work. And if we make the same mistake in the coming election, nothing will change. So that's one biggest point I have, so I'll leave the table to Chris and talk to you later about this.
Okay. Well, I think we're definitely going to want to come back to how the electoral district system impacts the possibilities for political change. But first of all, let's go to Chris Winkler and find out his basic answer to the question, can the opposition parties avoid the same experience that happened in 1994 to 1997 to Shinshinto, the New Frontier Party?
Good evening. Thanks again, Michael, for the invitation and the nice introduction. There are a few people on this, a few faces on this table that know me a little bit. I am very careful with making projections because, particularly with modern Japanese politics, we are often wrong. So you will excuse me for not saying yes or no to whether it will work or not. Let's just say that history is not necessarily on the opposition side here. What Yonenaga Sensei just said about the electoral system and the necessary, well, selection of candidates in the SMD and the single member districts is one big issue. The other issue is, well, party control and party ideology. And we have seen that the opposition very often, unlike the LDP, has had problems of coming to some sort of consensus of what it stands for. And if trouble occurs, and as soon as you reach a certain critical mass, I mean, that is not specifically about Japan, but in all major political parties, there is controversy, and how do you manage that? And the track record here in Japan is, well, not very good, to say the least. So it would be interesting to see if this new party, if a combination of Mr. Hashimoto's wing of the Ishinokai and, well, some groups from within the DPJ, Mr. Maehara, etc., and then the Uinoto were to get together, whether these differences that will inevitably occur could be sort of managed or kept in check. I mean, that has sort of been the key problem in Japanese politics. In fact, not only during the post-war period, but also dating back all the way to the pre-war period with the Seiyukai and the Minseito, that people, when there was controversy, just decided to walk away. And when everything's said and done, the one sort of party still standing that benefited from it was the LDP, because the LDP has, and this is something that's often forgotten these days, on many key issues been, well, pretty ideologically diverse too. But it has, for the most part, always found a way to sort of stick together with, well, few exceptions, Mr. Ozawa and Mr. Hata walking out in 1992. But when it comes to sort of controlling these different opinions within the party, the LDP certainly has a far better track record than the opposition. So I guess a lot will hinge on whether the opposition can make it work this time. And I'm not so sure that anything has changed drastically over the last 1.5 years to make that change or sort of induce such a change in the system.
Okay, I want to go to the floor pretty quickly, but before I do, I just want to throw one last little question to Yonenaga-sensei. Before the national unified elections, local elections next spring, how big do you expect this new party to be? I mean, for example, how much of the DPJ will join this new party? Will the DPJ completely be absorbed into a new party? What's your prediction, or what is your feeling at this time? How big will this leading opposition party be?
That's a very tough question, and no Japanese journalist can answer that right now. But my point of view is probably DPJ will not split. Somehow, other parties than DPJ is now getting bit by bit into pieces. My party, which is your party, Minanoto, split and became a unity party. And this Ishinokai,
Japan Restoration Party,
Restoration Party just now split, and they're seeking to take a portion of DPJ or take a portion of us. But probably we will find out that at this point, merging together has no sense, because we don't know when exactly is election. But in the rumor in Nagatacho today, there would be election, general election this year, maybe summer. That's not just a rumor, a bit more than that, because the reason is the opposition party is like this right now, bit by bit into pieces. Probably LDP will dominate again if they still have do election this year. And next, not next October, but October next year, another consumption tax raise is coming. So they don't want to have election right before that. They want to have election sometime this year to avoid this consumption tax problem. And also Okinawa. Okinawa election is coming this year. They want to have probably election before this Okinawa. So that's two reasons why Nagatacho now is very, very, they have tension whether LDP is going to have election or not. So if election is happening in the near future, probably this merging would accelerate, but not at this point, because another reason is there might be another split within the Restoration Party. People originate from Osaka, and the other side is not really into one piece. So at this point, DPJ will not part, or maybe it would be a new party including the whole DPJ, or DPJ itself might split with the labor union people and the other side.
All right, well, I want to tell our reporters, please don't run for the door and report this breaking news that we may have a general election. I know that you have to please hold your seats until the end of the event. Yes, well, I mean, I always assumed that the election would almost certainly be a double election in July of 2016, because I didn't see any reason why the LDP would want to take any chances with the huge majority they have now. But if you're right, all of us political journalists will be pretty busy this year. All right. Well, at this point, we do have, people with opinions around the room. Let's start with this basic question. Is there around this room a great deal of expectation that a unified opposition party that's beginning to kind of come together now is something that could challenge the LDP, or is it just so far behind that they don't have much to do? Thoughts? Questions? Yes, can you please take that microphone and introduce yourself first, and then ask your question or give your comment.
Good evening. My name is David Sherman. I'm from the German Embassy.
I think you need to switch it on. Okay.
All right. Good evening. My name is David Sherman. I'm from the German Embassy here in Tokyo. My very first thought is just a question, basically, I would have to the speakers, and that would be, who would lead this new party? So maybe you could talk a little bit about personalities and the different leadership figures that are out there. I mean, it sounds like there are some very interesting characters around there.
Do you have an opinion, before they answer, who you think it might be?
I mean, it's an open question, I believe. I mean, you have, of course, Hashimoto in the mix. It will be interesting probably to also see how much he can turn this into an opportunity for himself to overcome some of the more recent baggage of the more recent months and maybe past 1 or 2 years. You have Kenji Eda at Yonenaga and others as well. And I would be also curious to hear more about this groups within DPJ that you are referring to in terms of who that would be.
Okay, let's start with Chris on this one.
I guess it's really an open question. There's probably really no answer to it, but it would have to be some sort of power sharing again between Osaka and the people here in Tokyo. We've seen with Ishinokai that it really doesn't work all that well. That even though with modern technology people do video conferences and so forth, that there is a gap between the people in Osaka who are close to Hashimoto and who are, I mean, Hashimoto's power base traditionally is in both the assemblies for, the city and the prefecture. And these people have different priorities than, say, traditional or long-term parliamentarians here in Tokyo. So it would be interesting to see whether they can sort of bridge that gap and get it right this time if this new party comes into being somehow at some point. As for groups within the DPJ, traditionally, and I'm pretty sure Yonenaga-sensei has a better inside look at that than I have, but traditionally these groups were not as tight as factions in the LDP, the factions that we've traditionally known from the LDP, and that in fact many people actually had affiliations with more than one group. So it was pretty open, and people create new things. Mr. Hosono has just opened his own group earlier this year. And from what we know thus far is that it's mostly people who have been part or at the center of the former DPJ government. So Mr. Noda, former Foreign Minister Gemba, Maehara, probably Edano as well. So these people that were probably Okada Tetsuya as well, Ekatsuya, people who have been in high positions and who have not exactly the closest relationship with the current DPJ leadership. So if anybody from the DPJ decides it's time to split and the baggage from 2009, 2012 has been too big and we sort of have to break the entire thing down and start anew with a new name, and if not with new faces, then at least with a new party name that people don't affiliate with this, disaster, and we can debate later whether it really was a disaster, but with this perceived disaster, then it's probably rather these people than the left wing, the old Shakaito, the Socialist Party wing, people like Mr. Koshishi, who of course have backing of unions, Mr. Koshishi's case, the teachers' union, and who are very much at odds with Mr. Hashimoto. I mean, if you think back, one reason why there were problems between Mr. Kawamura in Nagoya and the Ishinokai was between Mr. Kawamura, of course, being another disciple of Mr. Ozawa, coming initially from the DPJ before becoming mayor of of Nagoya. Within his party, there are people who have close ties to unions. And Mr. Hashimoto has spent a lot of time and energy of trying to rid first the prefectural government in Osaka and now, well, the city government of Osaka from these sort of, well, union influences that he would like to get rid of. So it would probably be the people who are on the right wing of the DPJ rather than the left wing to join forces, if that ever comes well into being.
And just before we move to Yonenaga-sensei, one part of his question is, do you see in this realignment of the opposition parties any hope for Hashimoto to recapture some of his momentum that seems to have been lost with all of his comments about various issues?
You know, I don't think that Mr. Hashimoto has lost a lot of popularity in Osaka. I guess he is still pretty popular. I mean, if he wasn't as popular anymore, the LDP would have already kicked him out, right? I mean, during the snap election, they would have come up with somebody with a popular face, and probably the current power constellation would have, or might have had a chance to defeat him. But since he is still, at least he as a person, very, very popular in Osaka, they've stayed away from it. Whether on a national level that would translate to popularity for the party is something that I'm not really sure about, because at no point Mr. Hashimoto was really that popular in, say, rural areas, for instance, because much of his agenda is obviously focused on Osaka, with the Osaka Tokoso idea, and then larger urban areas. So if we're talking about federal structures and the like, of course, I mean, places like Fukui, for instance, are never going to say, yes, we want federal structures, because then who is going to pay the bills, right? If Tokyo To or Osaka To or Osaka Fu do this, it's one thing because they probably have the financial leverage to do it, but the other prefectures depend on local subsidies, right, or subsidies from the central government to survive. So a lot of that message and that appeal that Mr. Hashimoto carries is limited to urban areas. So I'm not sure whether, even if he sort of recovers some of the mojo that he had, he would help the party nationwide.
Okay, and going back to the original question and throwing it to Yonenaga-sensei, who do you see as the potential leaders of this new group coming together?
Yes, Mr. Herman's question is a very good one, because that's something is lacking right now. If we want to change and make a very good opposition party, new, strong party, we need a big name or new name. So far, the leaders of each party is Mr. Ishihara, Hashimoto, Mr. Asao, Eda Kenji. DPJ's Kaeda is now probably forced to come down from this leadership by its own party. And we haven't mentioned this name yet, but Mr. Ozawa, he's still a member of the parliament. If before last December, the first split was your party and Unity Party, but if that didn't happen, and if all of the names I mentioned just gathered together, maybe it might have made a movement close to Shinshinto, but that's not happening. They're splitting still. The success, which I was a part of it, of DPJ, was it was united already, and two big names, Mr. Ozawa, which failed a little bit early in the election, who relayed the baton to Mr. Hatoyama, that two big names made some kind of an expectation. That was your first question. Expectation. Now, the names I mentioned, Ishihara, Hashimoto, Asao, etc. Maybe Hashimoto is rather new and powerful, but as Mr. Winkler mentioned, the basic policy is very, very limited to Osaka. So maybe it's not going to grow nationwide because he already had a shot and he failed in a way. So if there's a complete different new revolutionist coming from nowhere of this Nagatocho right now, maybe it might work under his leadership. But at this point, we do need some kind of a new type of leader if this opposition party, if to merge into one group, we need another name. That's my point.
So I think you both agree then that the lack of clear leadership figure among the opposition figures is going to be a really handicapping issue to deal with the challenge of the LDP. And neither of you really see who that person would be right now, huh? Probably, if it's someone we come up with now, it's not going to be any expectation from a Japanese citizen, because Japanese people, we want something new. So, but if something new is very, very attracting, it might change everything. So I can't come up with a name now, but maybe it's hiding somewhere.
Now the question is, do the Japanese still demand something new, right? I mean, you could make the point that the fact that Mr. Abe, for basically being the first guy to ever, or the first politician to ever sort of come out of retirement and become prime minister after, and particularly after this disaster in 2007, that people voted for the LDP in 2012 because, well, they were sick and tired of this promise of change. And then, at least from the perception of many, not much having changed at all, despite this promise for, well, 20, 30 years going on and on and on. So that people just wanted stability. And then, if there is one sort of stable component in Japanese politics throughout, well, at least since 1955, it's been the LDP, of course. And people selected that, hoping that, well, the LDP, with its extreme amount of experience in government, will eventually get things right. I guess it's not so much a question of selling somebody to the public as it is, first of all, to sort of within these different groups to come up with a decision as to who is going to lead the entire thing and who is then empowered to actually do things. That would be interesting. I mean, it would probably take people to say, okay, I'm going to step back from the first to the second line, and whether people are eventually able to put their egos aside. And I mean, we've seen pretty often, even with, also with, as you know, with the DPJ, that this more often than not does not work very well. So that would probably be a first step before you can actually think of who is the best candidate to actually challenge Mr. Abe in a leadership contest for the prime ministership.
Okay, we're open. Yes.
I have another question.
Please introduce yourself first.
Sorry. Beata Bohorodycz from Poland, Adam Mickiewicz University. So I have another question because the leadership has been quite a contentious issue in Japanese politics. Some people arguing that actually strong leaders are not very popular with Japanese voters. And for example, who could predict that Koizumi would become such a popular politician? And the same with Abe. He was so, I mean, he was a complete failure in the first cabinet, and at least I don't remember anyone predicted predicting at the time that he would become so successful, that he would be elected for the second time. So so I'm just wondering how important is strong leader for uniting a party. So maybe some other, Mr. Winkler just mentioned some other factors that might be more important, which would contribute to forming a strong new opposition party. So what other factors, element would you think of that are important for forming the opposition party besides the leadership?
Okay. Thank you for the question. When DPJ gained power from LDP, the biggest energy that was there, I was a part of it, so I felt it, was not this technical manifesto. We would pay 26,000 yen for each children. Not something like that. Maybe that's a portion. But the bigger issue was we have to break the domination of bureaucratic system and also cut the corruption of LDP political members. Those two very big issue was something people wanted DPJ to do something about it. Now, on the other hand, after we gained power, the manifesto didn't work. We couldn't have enough budget to actually run this manifesto. Well, there was this big earthquake and tsunami, but still, we couldn't manage our country well enough. So, as Mr. Winkler mentioned, people now want stability rather than revolution. But Mr. Abe is doing good so far. Economy looks it's rising again. But in depth, bureaucratic power is now probably more powerful than when DPJ got into power. And corruption, there's always corruption. If we look at this small constituency areas, there's a lot of corruption of this LDP member and these local bodies like JA, Japan Agriculture, or this small economic bodies. So this corruption and bureaucratic dominance, if people realize that's happening again, and some big opposition body, and not the small bits, but the one big opposition party might fix that again, then it might be another energy to defeat LDP. But so far, this regain of this stability is working well at this point.
Well, as Yonenaga-sensei just said, I mean, when everything's said and done thus far, the LDP has made very, very few mistakes since coming back into power. So, I mean, you've had the scandal with Mr. Tokuda, and you've had other small scandals, certain comments by Mr. Aso about what we should or should not learn from the Nazis and so forth. So, these sort of things, but they never really hurt the government as such because people perceived there was no alternative and because they wanted, well, a stable government. Now, probably without the LDP making mistakes again, it would be very, very hard to sort of present a credible alternative. But sort of as a first step, you would have to get a new party together under at least somewhat popular leadership, at least under somebody who can challenge the LDP in the Diet, who is vocal, who is capable of presenting his views well coherently and concisely on TV, and who can sell that agenda. And you would have a halfway coherent agenda because, well, the media is, of course, going to pay attention, and particularly after the breakup of the Minamoto and now the Ishin-no-kai, the media will be all over questions like constitutional reform and the like, and say, well, but you guys don't agree on this or that again. So, and you believe it's going to work. And, well, then you would have to say, well, yes, but we have management or a leadership in place that is going to rein in people, and people are going to accept it. And that's the big question, whether you can actually make that work. So that probably would be, other than a popular leader, sort of the things that I believe would be important to get something promising started.
Just one more question related to Yonenaga Sensei's answer, because I understand that you mentioned issues, right? Uniting issues. So how would you evaluate the issue of closing down the nuclear power plants? Is it strong enough to create a party that they would win with the LDP?
Yeah, let me amplify that question. It's been very clear that the opposition parties in the last couple of elections, the Tokyo gubernatorial election and probably the last couple of national elections, have tried to make the anti-nuclear issue the focus of their campaign. And although the opinion polls seem to say that most of the public agrees with them on that one issue, it does not seem to have been a winner in terms of winning a national or an overall comprehensive election. So where does the anti-nuclear issue fit? Although this is actually the theme probably of our next roundtable.
I think Tokyo, which has the biggest population, people of Tokyo is very, very ignorant about this nuclear issue because the third year of 3.11, I was attending this speech made in front of Yurakucho Station, right close from here. Minamoto, Watanabe Daihyo, etc. They all announced this big issue of nuclear power plant is still going on. Almost nobody stopped and heard their speeches. So it's, unfortunately, probably this issue about closing down or letting this power plant go will not be a single issue that would form a new big party or be the agenda of the election, unfortunately. But that must be one election. But Mr. Koizumi and Hosokawa, not as a politician, is now doing field work from outside. So maybe there's this problem with this water disaster, etc. It was on this newspaper today. But probably this should be an issue sometime which opposition party might have as a common issue. But at this point, this issue of constitution might be more of an issue than the nuclear power plant.
Well, you know, I do believe there is a difference between saying you are against restarting nuclear power plants or being in favor or against constitutional reform versus making it sort of the number one issue that makes you decide whom you're going to vote for come election day. If you look at polls, the interesting thing is that things like TPP, constitutional reform, and, well, the nuclear issue, so these things that journalists, academics, that we all like to talk about, they haven't really decided the last couple of elections. Indeed, they have been, for the most part, I'm not going to say irrelevant, but very, very low on the priority list. So you've had less than 10% of the people saying they made these the key issues. I mean, that was the case for constitutional reform, for TPP, and for nuclear power. And, well, I mean, that is how, well, the LDP eventually won. I mean, if nuclear energy would have been that big issue, right? I mean, we should have seen it, in particularly in 2012, which happened, well, the election slightly more than 1.5 years after 3/11. There should have been some sort of effect. But what we have seen, rather, is that people, even on the local level, that anti-nuclear candidates running for seats in districts or in towns or, well, local assemblies where there are nuclear power plants, that these people have actually a pretty hard stance and they didn't gain any ground. So what Yonenaga says and probably is correct, but I guess the problem with being anti-nuke is also a big question of the prefectures where you have these power plants, because people, of course, depend on the money. And without the money, of course, these regions have nothing economically to sort of stand or to survive. And so there is a huge incentive for the people actually living in these areas to get the nuclear power plants back online. But generally speaking, I don't believe that, or at least from the data that I'm aware of, that neither of these big issues that we like to talk about, and certainly constitutional reform being one of the things that I've been very interested for, well, almost a decade by now, is not something that decides elections for better or worse.
It's the economy, right?
Yeah.
I mean, that's the issue which again and again is the one that Japanese people actually vote on.
Social security.
If they feel that the party they feel will be the better economic manager is the one they vote for. What do you think?
Well, yeah, I mean, this is, if you look at the top three, or the sort of the issues that people care about, actually, that they place their ballot on, it's, well, as Michael said, it's economic stimulus, it is social security, pension system, and it's jobs. So these are pretty much the things that are far less abstract than constitutional reform or than, well, nuclear power and the like. And these are the things that really affect people in their daily lives, right? I mean, thus far with nuclear power, we've had no major blackouts. We've been close a couple of times, but nothing really has happened except that the bills have gone up, that we all pay. So it is not as big as an issue as just losing one's job, for instance. And I mean, I guess in that sense, Japan is pretty much consistent with the rest of the world. I mean, this famous saying, "It's the economy, stupid," right, comes from the United States, from the first Clinton administration, or from the first Clinton campaign. And this is pretty much true here in Japan, too, I guess.
Well, I have a constituency, Yamanashi, and I have a chance to talk with a lot of people. Housewives, their agenda is domestic governance. Okay, my husband's salary gets high, but consumption tax is also rising, which is, as a conclusion, better life. Those kind of things. And also they are very, very conscious about environment and health, especially children's health. So that's where nuclear problem might come in. But as Mr. Winkler told us, people of Fukushima, or maybe prefectures near that might be very conscious about this nuclear problem, but not Yamanashi is very far from Fukushima, so not as conscious as people in Fukushima. But if we talk about this economic point of view, why I mentioned people, the neglectance of people of Tokyo is a very big problem, is because nuclear power plant is not in Tokyo, it's in Fukushima, but that's Tokyo Denryuk. If they have to raise this electric fee, people of Tokyo is directly affected by that, and this Tokyo people is very neglected. That was my point about what I mentioned about negligence of people of Tokyo.
Okay, I'm opening it up to anybody. Yes, Siegfried, please.
Siegfried Nidl, freelancer from Germany. I think mostly the people in the direct near to the power plants, they vote for the power plants to restart it because they depend on it. People who live a bit far from it often more against it. Perhaps if you think about oil plant and this plant in Fukui. People in these towns, they are in favor of nuclear power. But the people in the Shiga prefecture, even affected by would be affected by a accident. They are against it. So I think there is a who is direct affected by the restart or who is affected by the accident. I think there are different votes this way.
Well, again, you're jumping into next month's roundtable the main theme, but let's try to wrap that part up by putting it this way. How many voters do you think there are nationally who are going to see the nuclear issue is decisive to their vote on whether they go for the LDP or an opposition party?
Well, you've had the last time 7% of people in exit polls sort of said they will vote based on, I guess it was 7% who vote on the nuclear issue. Now, that is, well, you could say, well, this is a lot, or it's not a lot, but compared to whatever you have, 30–40% for social security and economic growth and the like, it is very, very little. So the one big, to sort of conclude this, or to wrap this up, sort of the big litmus test will be, should the administration decide to build new power plants, what will the reaction be then, if they should go that route? Other than that, I don't see that nuclear will come and develop into a big issue anytime soon, unless there is some serious trouble in Fukushima, much worse than what we're experiencing now.
And I just agree with Chris. It would not be the top agenda of any election. So maybe this issue must not be an issue of this election, but because they're not every single one member in LDP is pro. There are COM members also in LDP. They just don't mention it. So I think it's a national agenda rather than the parliamentary agenda, this nuclear. And you should have this session next month or so about this.
Yes, actually, I remember Mr. Hashimoto said that it was one of the weaknesses of the Nihon Ishin no Kai was the division between the two leaders on this issue. And I think maybe after the break, one of the issues that, if you can remind me if I don't remember, is we need to look at what are the policy divisions within the opposition camp, which would prevent them from having coherent agenda. So that's one of the big issues I want to take after the break. But before we go to the break, let's take one more comment or question. I see Patrick.
Patrick Soll, Neue Zürcher Zeitung from Switzerland. You both mentioned before that people here vote based on economic policies, and you also mentioned social security. Now, social security includes pensions. What does Abe do? Well, A, he pumps up national debt even more. B, if I want a pension one day, I don't think inflation is a terribly good thing. Why, if I care about my pension, why, if I care about social security, would I vote for the LDP?
Well, should I... Let me clarify, maybe this wasn't clear before, but the way the question is phrased, it is not, are you in favor of increasing or decreasing the size of the welfare state? It is simply asking, are you in favor, or do you think welfare or social security is an important issue for you? So I guess what probably the LDP played very, very well, at least last year, was when these scandals came up with celebrities, mothers or, well, relatives receiving pensions, even though sort of the son could have, well, afford to pay for her or for the parents. The LDP did a very good job of exploiting that and saying, well, you know, we have an awful lot of people in this country who just exploit the system, and then let's just cut it. And I mean, to be perfectly honest, I was surprised that it went through and nobody said, well, you know, given that we already have a lot of holes in the social security network in this country anyways, is it really a good idea to punch further holes into it? But well, it didn't have any major effect, or it didn't affect the Abe administration negatively, because you sort of could twist it in a way of selling it to people saying, well, you know, we are only going to publish these who are not supposed to receive them anyways, right? So that would be my answer. Maybe Yonenaga Sensei has a better one.
If the people's agenda was whether to have stable pension system or not, probably no party should win, because there's no solid policy right now about what to do with the pension. The reason why I quit DPJ, one of the reasons, is because before building that idea or what to do with this pension problem, they chose to raise the consumption tax, mentioning they would use it for Social Security, but there's no plan how to use it, how much we need for this stable pension system, etc. So that's one question all of Japanese citizens should ask any politician right now. What are you going to use our 3% tax that we pay from this April? What are you using it for? And probably no politician can answer, because there is no answer. And it's going up to 10%. But that's a very good question, because we should ask at least this now dominating party, which is LDP, what are you going to do with this 10% consumption tax? So how are you going to affect it to the Social Security system? And that's one question we have to ask before the coming election.
Okay, well, we're past 7 o'clock, so at this point I would like to take the 10-minute break. The 10-minute break gives you many options. One option is to come and meet people up here. Another option is to meet each other. Another option is to go to the bathroom. Another option is to run away. But anyway, you now have your 10 minutes of freedom, and please use it wisely. And I'll see you here at 7:15 to restart. Okay, if you can begin to mosey on back to your seats so we can move on to the second part. Alrighty. Well, I guess we can start the second part with a little quiz. Test your knowledge of Japanese political history. Which top LDP executive of today began his career in the New Frontier Party?
Ishiba Shigeru?
Exactly. The Secretary General of the LDP today began his career in the New Frontier Party. And he then left, quit. He was one of the first people to quit from it. I guess you can probably guess why he quit from it. Disappointment in security policy was his reason for leaving the New Frontier Party. But it reminds us that one of the major reasons the New Frontier Party fell apart, maybe one of the main reasons the DPJ's time in power was short and not terribly successful, was that many different groups came together with many different politicians with many different ideas on even fundamental issues. And if we look at the small little splintered parties of today, has anything really changed? Whether they're broken up into 5 or 6 little parties, or if they come together in one major large-sized opposition parties, are they going to continue to be hamstrung by the fact that they simply don't agree on a vision for the nation? That there's just too many fractures, ideological fractures, running through the opposition for them to ever put up a serious challenge to the LDP for a long time. Certainly the LDP has its fractures as well, but less now than they did in the 60s or 70s. So my question to them, first of all, is what do they see as the major issues that still divide the opposition and will be a challenge to any kind of unified party? What are the big issues? You know, I believe Yonenaga sensei already brought up the idea of labor union affiliated politicians versus non-labor union. I mean, Rengo is still there. So this was one of the big issues for the DPJ. Rengo was the main backer for the DPJ, but at the same time, you have people like Maihara who doesn't like unions. So what isn't that problem still going to affect any opposition party? And what about other issues? So what are the issues which are the biggest challenges for opposition, for a united opposition party to function or come together? Let's start with Chris.
Well, this on. You know, I guess the union issue is one thing, constitutional reform is another, national security probably too, and then, well, maybe to some degree, well, fundamental human rights or various other things. Federalism may be another one. So I guess there's a whole range of issues that might produce frictions, issues, or sort of may hamstring the opposition in its quest to sort of reunite. But I guess, and this is a point that I really would like to make here today, if you look at Western parties, for instance, in the West, whether it was Labour with Tony Blair and the Iraq war question after it turned out there were no WMDs after all, or whether it was in Germany, back then Chancellor Schröder with the Agenda 21, or even now our current Chancellor in Germany with nuclear power, with military conscription and the like. These were all very, very controversial issues and in some cases still are, and still people backed the party leadership eventually. in the end, you elect somebody as party president, that person makes a decision, and then, well, you have to say, okay, am I loyal to this party, or am I loyal to my ideals? And there is something that is called, well, fractional discipline in Europe that is, well, pretty strictly enforced, and there, for whatever reason, it works pretty well. Maybe because parties have been around longer and there has been some continuity in party organizations, but for whatever reason, here in Japan, ever since the pre-war period, it doesn't work. And even with the LDP, if you look at its current state, I mean, things like TPP or with the state secrecy law and the like, people have said, no, I'm against it. Some have been punished, some not, but historically or traditionally speaking, the LDP has been very lenient, with the possible exception of Mr. Koizumi's reign, of dealing with dissenters. Why? Because it cares about people that can get elected. And that's the difference to the opposition parties, that the LDP has been, or has some sense of how to win elections. It had, of course, under the old system, but it also has under the SMD. And the opposition clearly does not have a strategy for that, as Yonenaga Sensei just before admitted.
In the old days, but not so old, the political system was divided into Hoshu and Kakushin. How do you define it in English? Hoshu,
Conservative and progressive or something?
Conservative, right. Now, if we look at this parties today, maybe half of DPJ is Kakushin, but otherwise, parties like Minanoto, Ishin, both of them split, Yuinoto, they're all conservative. And probably they are not neglecting to change the constitution. But if we go further into the issue of right of collective self-defense, that is an agenda that people might go against it or pro, and probably LDP know that by forcing this movement all the way to make this right of collective self-defense, would this part all these small parties into half. So if the issue is solely of Social Security, there would be three bodies: LDP and all the small parties put together, most of them conservative, half of DPJ, which is conservative, and then the left wings, which is half of DPJ, Social Democratic Party, etc. So if we are to merge in this ideological conservative union, it might be one of the body that might come against LDP, or it might even have, we might join the government, excluding Komeito, if we make this into this ideological group. But fortunately, that's not happening because the issue is not solely on the Social Security.
Yeah. Please, microphone and introduction.
My name is Birgit Teska. I'm a freelancer from Germany, and I might miss the point, but there always have been these factions within the LDP, and at the moment they seem to me more powerful than any opposition party that's out there and not going to be together. So I, for my part, it might be my Japanese not reading so much in newspapers, but I don't hear much of any internal opposition right now within the LDP. Am I not well informed, or is there no opposition at the moment, or is there forming any opposition that might eventually even leave the LDP at some point, or, you know, what about the internal opposition within the LDP?
There is always an opposition body, group, in any agenda, like agriculture, etc. But they are managing well that once they decide a certain policy, it looks like all of them are supporting that agenda, but actually it's not. It's just as you mentioned. But when it comes to election, it doesn't matter. They just make this proposal and they go for the election. Whether or not you personally follow that proposal as a whole, but as LDP member, they just support the big agenda itself and then run for election. But they always have this proportional opposition within the party.
Last month, Mr. Kiyuchi made an interesting point. Takatani Kiyuchi was one of our guests, and he said that a lot of the local LDP politicians right now are giving a lot of money to spend in their own local districts for various projects, and that this is kind of moderating any ideological conflict because they're happy to have money to throw around in their districts. But go ahead.
Well, you know, the factions certainly have their best days behind them, because under the old election system that Yonenaga Sensei just mentioned before, factions were the ones basically that appointed who was running in which district. And back in the good, I'm not sure whether you call it good, but in the old days, very often the LDP party headquarters was described as a ghost, obake in Japanese, because it didn't really have any power. So the local support organizations, the Koenkai, and the factions were the ones that picked candidates, that ran candidate campaigns, and in the end, the party headquarters had no power or influence over that process. This has changed profoundly. So basically nowadays, and we've seen this at full extent under Koizumi, if party headquarters doesn't like somebody, they are not going to give away the nomination. And since you need a party nomination, and particularly because with the new election system, the party affiliation or the party label has become more important, and you sort of bank on a popular party leader to help you getting reelected, sort of this power of the faction that traditionally has declined considerably. Now, the problem is that what journalists and academics alike always like to have is sort of make these sort of big, bold strokes and saying this has changed fundamentally. So what people did is they said in the 1990s, well, the factions are dead. It's like, let's close this chapter. Well, turns out that Mr. Abe got elected in 2012 in no small part because, well, Mr. Ishiba was not part of any faction. He had left his faction. And these people, well, made him pay for it. And exactly, if you look at sort of the factional affiliations, then the 30 to 40 votes that Mr. Ishiba sort of missed in the second round against Mr. Abe, these were factional votes coming from the Nukaga faction to which Mr. Ishiba formerly belonged. And so the factions are not as powerful as they used to be, but they're not as dead as they've been made. That is one point. The other point about the lack of opposition within the LDP is, well, Mr. Abe is popular right now. So if you come out now and say, I'm against it, Hantai or whatever, then you're only hurting yourself, right? There are a lot of people, first and foremost, the gentleman that Michael just mentioned before, Mr. Ishiba, who want Mr. Abe's job. So, I mean, politicians are in this game for power, right? And a lot of people, supposedly, from what one reads, Mr. Aso too, say, well, this guy got another chance, why don't I get another chance? So there are a whole bunch of people within the LDP who sort of waiting for Mr. Abe to make a slip of the tongue, to make a mistake, so they can go in and say, well, you know, now it's my turn. So this has always been the case, and it's not going to change. I mean, this is basic politics. As far as ideological issues are concerned, well, the question is, say you are against TPP, which, well, many parliamentarians, and particularly from locally, from rural areas are, what are you going to do realistically? In the good old days, you could always say, okay, we are going to throw our support to the Socialist Party. I mean, this is what Nokia, what Japan Agriculture did in 1989, and it made the LDP pay dearly for being too nice against the United States with, in talks about the liberation. Back then it was, I guess, about oranges and, well, citrus fruits, and sort of deliberating the market there. And, well, Nokia was, or sort of Japanese agriculture was against it, and they had the alternative. They could go to the Socialist Party, right? Nowadays, who are they going to go to? Are they going to go to Mr. Hashimoto, Mr. Ishihara, who, if they could, probably would abolish Nokia or, well, JA altogether right away, and not like the LDP is apparently pondering what I read today to phase it out within the next 5 or 6 years. And, well, the DPJ is not what it used to be anymore, so you lack alternatives. You lack options, right? And in the way the system is set up right now, you would need a big, strong platform sort of to oppose the LDP to have any chance of getting elected. You have very, very few people left who just can compete on the basis of the strength of their Koenkai. I mean, the people that are still as strong as that, you have seen these survive the 2005 election, basically despite having assassins being sent in by Mr. Koizumi, people like Mr. Hiranuma, for instance, and Okayama. They survived just on the strength of them being their own party. So there are some of these people left. Shizuka Kame being another one, for instance. But they're very few and far in between. So it is increasingly difficult for current LDP members to say, you know, I don't like current party leadership, and particularly those people that came in new in 2012, which there are quite a lot, and say, well, you know, I'm against this or that, I don't like it, because, well, then their nomination is gone, and there is a very, very good chance that they're not going to survive the next election.
Okay, I saw a hand over here.
Sebastian Massler from the German Institute for Japanese Studies. My question to the panel is, well, we have mentioned many parties until now. The only party we haven't mentioned is the Komeito. It seems to me that the opposition, as the formal opposition being in this area, the most powerful opposition is the Komeito within the government coalition. So at least the party with the most potential of causing harm to Abe anyway over the collective self-defense debate. So my question to you would be, as being an analyst and an insider in Nagatacho, has the Komeito learned from the dismantling of the Social Democratic Party over their stance towards constitutional revision under Murayama? Would they actually break away if people like Komura putting word to their action and pushing Abe's agenda, and Komura has said he wants to see a result within this diet session? Would the Komeito actually be willing to jeopardize their position within the coalition and break away? What's your take on it?
Well, before we get to that question, let me just remind everybody that the Komeito was, of course, one of the most important power centers of the New Frontier Party. And it's probably their experience in the New Frontier Party which is one of the reasons they stick like glue to the LDP now. But let's go ahead and hear what you have to say.
Probably there is a political issue that Komeito have in mind, which would act as sort of break against LDP or Mr. Abe, but they're searching for this landing point, because Komeito's concern is only to get within the leading party. So they would just say, not say, okay, we don't agree, we leave. That doesn't work. Because if Komeito finds another big party which might defeat LDP, maybe that's a turning point. But at this point, LDP is the only dominating single party which probably would win the next election. They would try to sort of stop what Mr. Abe might do in the social security area or the consumption tax area, what to do with this food, etc. So they would announce there are things that they have in mind that is against Mr. Abe, but they're probably under the table looking for an exact landing point. That's my opinion.
Well, you know, for one, I guess it's very, very hard to compare the Komeito to, say, the Socialist Party or any other party. Why? Because, well, there is the Soka Gakkai. And so, for a matter of fact, the Komeito has probably more so than any other party, with the exception of the Communist Party, a very, very strong and loyal support base that is not going to break away. The question is whether the Soka Gakkai itself is as strongly opposed to the reinterpretation of Article 9 as sort of it seems. And if history is any guide, then thus far, whether it was with the Iraq War or any other issue, they've usually found a compromise, they've given in, and they've had some success of talking the LDP out of some things and got something back and sort of moderated a little bit, but they've never really sort of drawn the line in the sand and said, well, we are going to leave if. In the end, of course, you have between both the Komeito and the LDP a very, very strong symbiosis come election day. The Komeito supports LDP members in single-member districts, and in exchange, the Komeito, with a few single-member districts candidate it has, and particularly in Osaka and then here in Tokyo, it gets support from the LDP that is vital to get elected. The other thing, of course, is that the Komeito probably still remembers, and this is what Michael probably referred to before about the Shinshinto days, when the LDP ran a pretty strong and aggressive anti-Soka Gakkai campaign of saying, well, you know, these guys are sort of breaching Article 20 of the Constitution, separation between state and religion, and so forth. And that was, or is generally considered to be one reason why the Shinshinto eventually fell apart. Because this of aggressive, well, anti-Soka Gakkai campaign, in particularly in the wake of the Aum affair, where people were really sensitive to the question of religion and politics. Whether the Komeito can actually pull an effective sort of opposition within the coalition, I guess I'm as skeptical as Yonenaga sensei here, because, well, as I said, if history is any guide, they usually say, hantai hantai, we are against it. And then, in the end, they usually find some compromise, but usually agree and go along with the LDP. But of course, when it comes to Article 9, they have been pretty consistent there, that they are against it, or the type of the revision they have in mind with just adding a third paragraph to Article 9 has been pretty consistent. So if they sort of fell or basically withdraw that position, that would sort of be probably more so than anything else they've done thus far, a very, very big compromise with the LDP to stay in power. And you would have to see how well that sits with the Gakkai.
I saw Siegfried first, and then your question.
Back to the faction. Back to the faction question. I think faction in the LDP will come back if Abe gets weaker. If he will lose popularity, then the faction will come back. Or if the next prime minister will be perhaps Ishiba, he has not a personality like Abe. He's not popular. Was never popular like Abe. So I think faction then will come back. I think the faction problem, I think, in the Japanese parties is because parties strong fixed on persanalities. A leader plays a much greater role in Japanese parties as in perhaps in European countries' parties. I think, and if a leader of a faction or a party has things go wrong, then he will leave the party, and some people will go with him. It's not perhaps in Europe, parties more based on program, and this it's not a leader party. So in this way, I think the party will not split like the Japanese parties. I think the parties based on the leadership, I think this is a problem of the Japanese parties.
So are we not hearing about factions simply because Abe continues to be in relative stratosphere in terms of popular opinion? And if things go south economically and he's in the 25 percentile range, or then are we going to start hearing about the factional bosses maneuvering?
Okay. You're right in one thing, that the reason that's not happening is Mr. Abe's doing pretty much well. But before they lost power from DPJ, they didn't have to worry about any other party. I mean, they dominated the parliament for more than half a century. So within the party, there are a group of liberal idea, etc. So, and that served as sort of like a educational system, as well as this grouping. But now, probably after Mr. Koizumi, that has changed a little bit. But I don't think it would go back after Mr. Abe. So far, probably the idea of this faction is not as strongly related as before. So I would say it would not come back.
You know, for the very reasons that I gave before, the factions are never going to regain the strength they had under Tanaka or Takeshita, because of election, well, of how the election system works these days. I do believe that we don't hear an awful lot about the factions because there is very little to report about. I don't think that criticism is going to come on a factional basis much more than on an individual basis. If you look at the 2012 presidential election within the LDP, you've had the interesting constellation that initially a part of the Machimura faction to which Mr. Abe belongs backed Mr. Machimura himself, and the other part backed Abe. So Mr. Modi, the former prime minister, was strongly in the first round, not Mr. Mr. Machimura, and then Mr. Modi backed Mr. Ishihara. So you've had one faction, and it was backing 3 candidates. And 2 members from the same faction, Mr. Machimura and Mr. Abe, running in the same election was something that was pretty much unheard of. And there was a lot of maneuvering to get this together, and it didn't really work out. And well, in the end, luckily for the faction, that you've had Mr. Ishiba, who is within the party not very well liked because he's apparently hard to get along with. I don't know, I've never met him, but that is sort of what people always tell you. And who has no factional affiliation. And then you have had Mr. Abe. So it was pretty easy, of course, for the factions to then get together. And the other thing, of course, that sort of played against Mr. Ishiba is that he said he wants to get rid of the factions, of course. And they didn't, you're not going to support somebody like that, right? But whether the factions are going to make a major comeback, I doubt it, because the public still probably doesn't like the idea of the LDP going back to the good old days. So it is probably not as much of the strong coherence that you've had before, at least, if not in ideological issues, then sort of on organizational issues, or whom are you going to vote for in a presidential election and the like. But people will raise their arm and say, you know, I would like to run if the time comes. And then the question is, how are the factional chairmen still strong enough, somebody like Mr. Kishiba, who is comparatively young still by LDP terms, are they strong enough to even contain the factions whose chairman they are? And I'm not sure about that yet, so I guess the factions have still a lot of problems, and whether they will be able to act as coherent entities again is something that depends on, well, case by case, and also on the situation.
Okay, let me add this perspective. As a Japanese journalist, which covered this field, before Mr. Koizumi, we have this special program on the day of forming a new cabinet. Usually, before this faction era, there's always one journalist in charge of each faction. The system was very bureaucratic. This faction has this Minister of Health post, etc. So maybe not night before, but at least in the morning, each journalist would have information about, maybe not who, but from this faction, this post of minister would be the next cabinet member. But so we sort of had a general idea of the cabinet member before announcement. But Mr. Koizumi's way of doing it, was totally different. No one knew who would be the cabinet member until he made a phone call on the day of the forming cabinet. So this bureaucratic system of faction to form the cabinet, it changed after that, and probably it's not like before at this point. And as Chris mentioned, people doesn't want this old LDP system, so I don't think they would shift it back.
Okay, I need to, okay, I see two more questions. Oh, three, okay. All right. Well, we're getting short on time, and suddenly all of the members are getting excited to ask questions. Well, why don't we go for all three questions first, and then we'll move back to these guys.
Hello, I'm a newcomer to this club. My name is Hasegawa Michiko, and I'm majored in philosophy. So I'm going to make a very philosophical and simple question. And I would like to ask two of you, or all of you here, what good will there be if the opposition party our parties are successful to unite together and win the next election? I would very much like to hear. That's my question, very simple one.
A simple but important question. Ms. Kame, dozo. Yeah.
I just wanted to...
First introduction.
I'm Akiko Kamei. I'm a former member of the House of Councillors. I was elected in 2007 and served one term for 6 years, like Mr. Yonenaga.
Colleague.
Yeah, my old colleague is Mr. Yonenaga. And I was not re-elected last summer, so. And I just wanted to comment on the discussion on faction. And you mentioned Mr. Koizumi. I feel that when Mr. Koizumi appeared and took a leadership, he said, I will break LDP. And he did. Now LDP is one big political power, but good old days is gone. And we were talking about inner opposition in LDP. In old days, yes, discussion was more energetic in LDP. So in the cases like collective self-defense issue, there could be more opponents in the LDP to stop the prime minister, the LDP elected in the party election. But these days, because of Koizumi, who sent assassin candidate to the opponent in the party, the LDP members started, being quiet. And they're just waiting for the positions, the minister positions, the government position to fall on them. So it's very sad. And I just, I thought that it's interesting that Mr. Yonenaga mentioned in the first part of this today's talk that there could be an election in fall or by the end of this year. I think it's possible, but usually parties are formed towards the end of the year, and collective self-defense issue is going to be a big issue for Komeito Party, and what the government will do with the TPP, and there are so many fundamental issues. So I think it is possible. We don't know what will happen in a few months after. So that's it.
Okay, Mr. Herman.
Just very quickly to piggyback on that question, I'm just wondering if there were really elections this year, and you mentioned the big debate right now over collective self-defense and all these issues. I mean, it seems like Komeito and LDP are having a little bit of a hard time right now to find common ground on those issues. So if there was a campaign now, wouldn't that sort of might not be the result that in that campaign Komeito has to position itself farther away from LDP, which might at least slow down the project that Abe has right now? I mean,
Okay, well, I try to respond to all three and do it all in 1 minute.
Okay. First, philosophical question, the meaning of this opposition party. I told you earlier that DPJ's one mission was to break the bureaucratic system and also fight against corruption. And another theme was to make a two big parties system, which would work like almost like a American system or a Great Britain system. But that failed, and now it's a disaster now. So one philosophical meaning, maybe, to unite, is to make a two big party system which could check each other on each election and afterwards. That would be the meaning, to unite.
When you say check,
Hmm?
it means to go.
Can you use a microphone?
That way.
Exactly.
And there's no stability anymore.
No, check meaning, okay, DPJ, they had power, they failed, now it's back to LDP, but if LDP fails, DPJ again, that kind of a checking. So, well, check meaning election would decide which is good, which served good, which served bad, which lied, etc.
Thank you.
Good. I will try to go through all three of questions, comments very briefly. I'm not sure whether I'm going to make it in 1 minute, but I will try. I'm not sure whether I can provide a philosophical answer to your philosophical question, but it goes in the same direction as Yonenaga Sensei's reply, in that I do believe it would be very desirable to have a democratic system in which we have alternating parties in power, so that if there is, like in 2009, there was a lot of discontent with the LDP and somebody else comes in, and then, well, the DPJ made a lot of mistakes, and people said, well, you know, you guys don't have any experience. Well, how was the DPJ supposed to get to have any experience? So a competitive system where there is where checks and balances within the party system would be something that's very desirable. So people have a choice and say, as Yonenaga Sensei said, well, you know, we don't like you anymore. Somebody else, please take over. And with some experience, please don't make it a mess. So that would be something that I firmly believe would be pretty healthy for Japan. That is one thing. And that obviously relates to your question of whether you want stability or whether you prefer checks and balances within a democratic system. That is, of course, a choice. As for Ms. Kame's comment about Koizumi, I do believe that's certainly one thing that changed. The other thing, of course, that you have right now is there are, of course, veterans who are critical of Mr. Koizumi, Kato Koichi, Koga Makoto and the like. People even go as far as to publish articles in the Akahata Shimbun, right, which is pretty remarkable if you think about it. But of course, these people are not in parliament anymore, and you have, I don't know, more than 100 parliamentarians who are first time elected, right? And for them to raise their arm and say Hantai, well, probably would be close to political suicide. So that probably is a big part of the issue. Last but not least, Mr. Herman's question about the LDP Komeito campaign. It would be very interesting to see if, at this point where we stand right now, what the Soka Gakkai sort of would do. And the big question is really how much power or influence does the Soka Gakkai have at this point over the Komeito, and how strong does it really feel over that issue? And if the Soka Gakkai really says, or Ikeda Daisaku really says no, then I don't believe that the Komeito can actually afford to vote or to go along with the LDP, and that would cause all kinds of trouble. But where that really happens, nobody knows. And as I said, if history is any guide, then in the end there will be some compromise where the LDP will show some consideration to the Komeito, and the Komeito will eventually go along with that.
Okay. Well, if we were going to have a third hour, I would have started to bring up how the media role might play in all of this, but I guess we'll have to save that for a future roundtable. But I want to thank you all for coming to the second roundtable, and as is our tradition here, these two gentlemen have just earned themselves an honorary membership to the FCCJ for the next 1 year, and I want to tell them that having been here at a roundtable and given such a performance, that you're sort of morally obligated to come as many months as you can, because we do want this to be kind of a community and building of discussions and moving forward and hearing other experts. So unfortunately, our two guests from last month, one of them's out of the country and another one couldn't make it, but we are expecting them to return, and we hope that you do the same. Mr. Harunobu Yonenaga, here is your 1-year membership.
Thank you.
And Mr. Winkler, actually, he spoke at a press conference a couple months ago. But what he gets out of this is about 2 or 3 extra months of honorary membership.
I guess 3 months, yes.
Okay. And a couple of last points. Please tell a friend. We have, I think, a very high-quality group of people around the table today, but I'm hoping for high quality and higher numbers, too. And I hope that by letting people know that it's worthwhile to come to one of these, that more people will come. And also, one of the points of these events is to convince non-members that, hey, you know what? It's time to join the FCCJ. So if you're a non-member and you want to join this community on a permanent basis, please join us. We have information over there on the table, and we're waiting to hear from you. Thank you very much.
I think it was very interesting. We needed a 3rd or 4th hour.
Yes, I think so.
Thanks, Michael, for the invitation.